Walk down the canned food aisle at Walmart. Rows of neat metal cylinders. Beans, corn, soup, tuna, chili. Most people see convenience, cheap calories, something that will last for years. But those cans are the descendants of a desperate invention created for war. They were designed because armies were starving, because explorers were dying, because no one had figured out how to keep food from rotting long enough to keep people alive far from home. And the truth is, the story behind those ordinary shelves is stranger, darker, and more revealing than most shoppers will ever realize. Today, we're going to dig into the untold truth of canned foods, the kind you find at places like Walmart every single day. You'll learn how canning was invented under pressure from war, why the first cans had to be opened with bayonets, what best buy dates actually mean, and why the humble can on the shelf still carries the DNA of survival technology. This isn't a ranking video. This is the deeper story behind the aisle. In the late 1700s, Napoleon's armies were marching across Europe. Soldiers were dying, not just from bullets, but from hunger and spoiled food. An army, the saying went, marches on its stomach, and the French stomachs were failing. So the government offered a large cash prize to anyone who could invent a reliable way to preserve food for long campaigns. A French confectioner and chef named Nicolas Appert took up the challenge. He experimented for years. Eventually, he discovered that if you sealed food inside glass containers and heated them long enough, the food didn't spoil. He didn't fully understand why it worked. Germ theory didn't exist yet, but it worked. Appert won the prize. His method used glass bottles sealed with cork. It was revolutionary. Then, in 1810, a British merchant named Peter Durand took the idea further. He received a patent for preserving food inside tin-plated iron containers. Those early metal cans were thick, heavy, and incredibly difficult to open. Soldiers often used bayonets or knives to hack them open. Early commercial canning was far from perfect. In the 1840s and 1850s, the British Navy suffered a major scandal when large quantities of canned meat supplied by a contractor named Stephen Goldner were found to be putrid. Entire shipments had to be thrown overboard. Some of the same defective cans had been issued to Sir John Franklin's Arctic expedition, which disappeared while searching for the Northwest Passage. The failure raised serious questions about quality control in an industry that was still young and poorly regulated. Opening the cans remained a serious problem for decades. The first practical can opener was not patented until the 1850s, more than 40 years after the metal can itself. Until then, people relied on knives, chisels, or, in military settings, bayonets. The cans were so thick that simply getting to the food required real effort. In the United States, canning expanded rapidly during the Civil War. Both Union and Confederate forces relied on canned goods when fresh supplies could not keep up with moving armies. After the war, the industry shifted towards civilian markets. Companies began producing smaller, more convenient cans aimed at ordinary households rather than just military or expedition use. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, canned food had moved from a specialized survival tool into everyday American kitchens. What we see today at stores like Walmart is the result of that long transition, a technology invented under the pressure of war and exploration, refined through scandal and necessity, and eventually made ordinary enough that most people never think about where it came from. The can was born out of military necessity. It was never designed for your pantry. It was designed so that men far from home wouldn't starve. By the mid-1800s, canned food was traveling with Arctic explorers, naval expeditions, and armies. Some of the oldest surviving cans were carried on voyages searching for the Northwest Passage. Canned meat, vegetables, and soups became tools of empire and survival. The technology spread, factories improved, the cans got thinner, the process got faster. Eventually, the can opener was invented, decades after the can itself. What started as an emergency military technology slowly became ordinary. By the 20th century, canned food was in almost every household, It was cheap, shelf-stable, and required no refrigeration. That ordinary metal cylinder you pick up at Walmart is the end result of more than 200 years of refinement of a wartime invention. But the original purpose never completely disappeared. Canned food is still, at its core, a survival technology. It is food that has been sealed against time. Walk the canned food aisle today, and you'll notice something. There are national brands, and there are store brands. The prices are different. The labels look different. The ingredients lists vary. What most people don't think about is that best by, or best if used by dates on commercial cans are about quality, not safety. High-acid foods like tomatoes and fruit generally hold peak quality for a shorter time. Low-acid foods like vegetables, meats, and soups can remain safe for years if the can is intact and stored properly. A can that is bulging, deeply rusted, leaking, or severely dented along the seams should never be used. Those are the real warning signs. The printed date is mostly about flavor and texture declining over time. There's also the matter of what lines the inside of the can. For years, many cans used epoxy linings that contained BPA. Consumer pressure and industry changes have pushed most manufacturers toward alternatives. The exact lining still varies by product and by brand. That information is rarely obvious on the shelf. None of this means canned food is dangerous when handled correctly. It means the product you're looking at is the result of long industrial and historical compromises between cost, shelf life, safety, and convenience. The untold truth isn't that canned food at Walmart is secretly toxic or fraudulent. The deeper truth is that we have normalized a technology that was invented because people were starving in wars and on expeditions. We take for granted that food can sit on a shelf for years and still be edible. That was once an almost miraculous achievement. It required heat, sealed containers, and a willingness to experiment when the science wasn't fully understood. Every can is a small piece of that history. It is industrial, it is practical, and it still carries the quiet seriousness of its origins. When you open a can of beans or corn or soup, you are opening a direct descendant of the containers that kept soldiers and explorers alive. The packaging has become ordinary. The original desperation has been forgotten. That gap between the dramatic history and the calm, fluorescent-lit aisle is the real story. The next time you're standing in the canned food aisle, look at the rows of metal cylinders a little differently. They are not just cheap convenience. They are the polished end of a long chain that began with armies that needed food that wouldn't rot, explorers who needed calories that could survive the cold, and inventors who solved a deadly problem with heat and sealed containers. The cans at Walmart are ordinary. The history behind them is not. If you found this as fascinating and slightly unsettling as I did, subscribe to the Food Prestige and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell me, what's the most surprising thing you've ever learned about a food you buy regularly? I read them. And if you want more stories about the hidden side of everyday food, check the playlist on screen now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.